Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special Fight and Focus roundtable discussion. That's right, there are going to be people here talking all things Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley II. That is coming to you in just a moment. First, I'm Josh Shernoff, and we are so excited for you to join us here as we talk about Paul versus Woodley II. Now, this is only 4 months removed from last August's fight that ended in a split decision. So what's going to happen this go around? Well, we brought in the best of the best, the experts, to talk all about it. But I'm not going to be your host today. No, we are bringing you one of the biggest personalities in all of combat sports interviewing. Please welcome the Schmo.
Very much appreciated that kind introduction, Josh. Thanks for having the Schmo back for another Fight and Focus. We have a loaded show for you today, getting ready for Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley II in Tampa, Florida, December 18th. So, shall we introduce the panel?
We shall. But before we do, I just want to make sure everybody knows that this, of course, will be live on Fight everywhere in the world except for the U.S. and Latin America. And of course, if you're in the U.S., you want to check this out on Showtime. That is going to be your home to watch Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley II. So without any further ado now, Schmo, let's go to your panel.
And for today's guest, we have the one and only Peter Maniatis from Down Under, from Melbourne, Australia, a promoter, a manager in the fight game. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be on the show, Schmo.
Thanks for coming back and joining the Schmo. And we have Jack Figg, a reporter from The Sun, joining us from the UK. Thanks for joining us today, Jack.
Schmo, thanks for having me. Hope you're all well, guys.
And last but not least, a man we've seen write a whole lot in the fight game, Dan Rafael. Thanks for joining the Schmo today.
Schmo, always a pleasure to be on with you. Thank you very much for having me back.
Of course. Gentlemen, let's get right into it. There's a lot of great storyline for Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley II, but of all the fights and all the storylines, which intrigues you the most? Let's start with you, Dan.
I think what intrigues me the most about the fight is the fact that they fought once before. It was a close fight, but Jake Paul was the winner. Tyron Woodley felt like he won. I felt like Jake Paul clearly won. So the question to me, storyline-wise, is can Tyron Woodley do something different to actually win the fight instead of just get the win on one scorecard? Because it was an 8-round split decision when they first met back in August. So who can make the better adjustment since they saw each other and saw each other in their very recent past?
Well, that is true. And we have seen Tyron Woodley accept this fight on less than 2 weeks' notice. So let's bring that next to you. Let's bring it to you, Jack. What do you make of the most intriguing storyline for this fight?
Well, it's a good point you bring up there, Schmo, the late notice replacement. To be honest, I mean, if you listen to anything Tyron said recently, he has said all along that he was going to rematch Jake and that he didn't feel the Tommy Fury fight was going to happen. So in his mind, he has somewhat been preparing for this. So it's not like, an Andy Ruiz Jr. situation where he's literally just got the call on a very short amount of time and he's gone into sort of the unknown. Tyron has in his head at least been preparing for this possibility. But for me, I sort of agree with Dan in terms of the most interesting storyline for me going into this is the tactics. I mean, how much does each man change? For me, I think Woody has a lot to change or needs to change a lot. For me, I actually don't think Jake Paul should change all too much. I felt like he did win fairly handily, and if he does try and change his game plan, whether that will actually play into Tyron Woodley's favour.
So, Jack, what you said was pretty interesting, too. You think that this played all along to Tyron Woodley's plan, that he thought all along that he would be rematching Jake. So, realistically, do you think he's had any training prior to getting the call up to have this rematch? Or where do you think his psyche is and where he's physically ready at this point?
Well, I mean, you can always stay ready, but that's not as actually, getting fight ready. You might have had it, something in his head, but you can't quite push the way you would if you had it, signed on the dotted line. But if you listen to anything he said, even just before the Tommy Fury fight was signed, I mean, over here we were told that fight was almost a done deal for quite a while. He seemed fairly in denial. He seemed right up until the last minute that he was in fact getting the rematch. So if that is true, I do believe that he would have, started training. If you look at his social media, you'll see that he was at least training with his coach Gerald Tucker, and I believe with his other coach Pedro Diaz as well. They've done some training as well. So he has been in the gym, from what we understand. He wanted to fight in January, but it doesn't matter how convinced he was before he actually got the call to replace Tommy. There's no way he could have been as focused as he would have if the fight was confirmed.
Peter, what's the most intriguing storyline for you for this fight card?
Now, first, I'd like to say it's an honour to be on the show with you guys, Schmo, Dan Rafael, and Jack. You guys are outstanding boxing people, so it's an honour to be on the show with you guys. Look, we've got an Australian on the undercard. We'll go into that a little later on. But look, Jake Paul, I think he always fights to prove that he does belong, because a lot of people just think he's a YouTube guy. He's just one of these, like the Kardashian type of things. They become famous for nothing really in particular other than being famous. So he's picked boxing, the toughest sport in the world. And he's going in up against Tyron Woodley, who's had, close to 40 MMA fights. He's a real fighter, even though he's 39 years of age, maybe a touch more than Jake Paul. Jake Paul to be doing what he's doing, it's an outstanding effort. He's a great athlete. Their first fight, I thought Jake Paul won the fight, but I thought it was competitive. Look, Jake Paul got hit with that right hand and he didn't handle it well. He kind of turned away, copped it behind the ear. That's the worst place to cop it sometimes. Shakes up your equilibrium. And he got shooken up for a while. He didn't know how to handle it, but Tyron Woodley didn't know how to finish. Or he wasn't capable of this stage of his career at 39 years of age to put the turbo on to actually look for more holes in the armour of Jake Paul. Now, this time, he's got a short prep, but most fighters, look, you get some top fighters that gain 20 pounds in between fights, and you get other fighters that are just gym rats. You have to kick them out the gym. I don't know who Tyron Woodley is. I don't know if he's been in the gym, he's active, and sometimes a short prep can keep him crisp and sharp. But I'm tipping that he has been in the gym. It's an 8-round fight, and I'm tipping that if his trainers are pretty smart, they're going to work on a game plan and landing that short right hand on Jake Paul and landing some power shots on him and try and get him out of his rhythm, because he hasn't got that much experience as a fighter at this level.
Dan, as somebody who's seen the fight game for many decades, covering the greats and people that are starting off their career and seeing where things take them, do you believe fighting Tyron Woodley a second time for Jake Paul, who's 4-0 in the beginning stages of his career, what value, if any, does that bring for him moving forward?
I think the main value is because he's a late replacement, it brings him a big paycheck. I don't think that he really wanted to fight Woodley a second time. I think he was looking forward to fighting Tommy Fury, who withdrew from the fight, claimed some kind of medical issue. I was told it was sort of like chest inflammation or whatnot. So I think that for Jake, he may not be as up for this fight as he was the first time, and because he was looking forward to fighting Tommy Fury, of course, the younger brother of the heavyweight boxing champion, Tyson Fury. And I think what was interesting about that matchup was it was going to be the first time that Jake Paul was in the ring in his professional career with an athlete that was only a boxer. I mean, we know that Jake hasn't had a tremendous amount of experience, and the opponents that he has been facing have not been boxers first, although good athletes, a basketball player, 2 MMA fighters, and a fellow YouTube personality so far. So Fury was his chance to show what he could do against an undefeated fighter who was only a boxer. Now he goes back into the ring with Woodley, obviously a tremendous MMA fighter in his heyday, known for his striking ability. But it just makes me wonder, can he be up enough for the rematch? Because he already did beat him. He's not a real boxer. He's got nothing really to prove, only to lose if Tyron Woodley can somehow win this rematch. So I think what it brings Jake, it's just a way for him to get more rounds in the pro game, keep the yardstick moving, so to speak, and collect a nice check and hopefully put on a good fight for the fans that are going to watch this on pay-per-view.
Jack, what would you say the perception is of Jake Paul over in your neck of the woods? And let's say of Tommy Fury, who's no longer part of this fight. And him stepping up to fight Tyron Woodley II. What do you think the conversation leads to for Jake Paul and his merits in the sport of boxing?
Yeah, well, firstly, we'll start with Jake. He's actually fairly well known over here in the UK. I think that has somewhat to do with the fact his brother Logan boxed a YouTube personality called KSI in England. So, KSI is very big over here. So the fact that he had a rivalry with the two brothers has meant that he has sort of transcended over here. But in terms of perception as a boxer, I feel like it's he does divide opinions. I mean, for me, I feel like he should be treated as any other guy that's been training for 3 or 4 years. And I think just because he's had a prior career as a social media influencer, I don't think that should exactly determine how good a boxer he is. I feel like if you go into any gym in America or England, if it was an amateur gym and you've got a guy that's had 4 bouts and they've been training a couple of years, you wouldn't ask what job they do. So I feel like for him, he struggles with that a little bit, but I think he's got to be credited at least for the way he puts on headline acts. Like Dan said, it's on pay-per-view, so he puts a lot on the line each time, and I feel like with this fight, he may not be as up for it as he was the first time. I mean, it's fair, he didn't really want a rematch. Why would he won the first fight? But I feel like with Jake, he's always got such a spotlight on him, whatever he does, whether it's a training session, a sparring session, I'm sure he always wants to prove a point. So I don't think he'll have a problem with sort of motivation for this fight, because I feel like he's always got a point to prove. With Tommy, I feel like it's a double-edged sword with him, because when he turned professional, he turned over with a lot of sort of hype and recognition because of his brother. So already he's going to be at a disadvantage in terms of judging his skill, because he's not just any usual boxer that turns over. I think he had about 10 junior bouts. He's not just any regular boxer. He's the brother of Tyson Fury. So it's hard. It was always going to be hard for him to get sort of an equal playing field when it comes to that. And then he went into a reality TV show over here, which really helped sort of cross over for him into the mainstream. But again, it brought even more naysayers. And where Jake might have got criticism for not, facing boxers with prior professional boxing experience, Tommy has faced a lot of criticism for boxing journeymen, which Dan will know more than anyone is a regularity for any boxer, especially over here in the UK. 4, 5, 6 fights in, that's who they face. But for him, he's faced a lot of criticism for not boxing anyone. So I feel like with Jake and Tommy, they're probably both in similar boats where they're treated differently, and of course that has positives as well, because they're for guys that are essentially novices, they get a lot of attention, which means there's a lot of money to be made. But of course, for the level they're at, people probably expect quite a lot from them.
All right, there it is. And then, Peter, I want to extend this question to you. For your neck of it's down under, what's the perception of Jake Paul? Because we have Leon Paro fighting on this undercard. And we saw in the last Jake Paul-Tyron Woodley fight, we saw a guy like Montana Love moving forward, signing with Matchroom Boxing, getting the extra eyes, getting the extra exposure. What would you say the reputation is of Jake Paul and the legitimacy he's bringing to the sport of boxing in your region?
Yeah, look, he's very popular in Australia and he's a great athlete. He hasn't got the respect of the boxing public yet because he hasn't fought anyone of note yet, but he's only had 4 professional fights. Let's not be tough on Jake Paul. Professional boxing's the hardest sport in the world. So he's earning his dues and everyone's kind of keeping a close eye on him, but no one's getting too excited. We're sort of waiting to see what happens when he steps up a bit more, and that'll happen as he keeps moving through the gears and moving through opponents. We'll see what he's made out of. But Leon Paro, I actually managed and promoted a boxer, fought Leon Paro March of this year, and I saw Leon Paro firsthand. He's a very good fighter. He's very fit as well. The fight was okay up to 6 rounds, and Leon Paro went into another gear as it went into the later rounds. So expect a good performance in Leon Paro up against Yoma Alamo, the tough Puerto Rican. They're both undefeated, and they're both world rated. So I'm sure Leon Paro is going to put in a good performance. And Australian boxing at the moment, after George Kambosos upset win over Teofimo Lopez. A lot of the Australian fighters are believing more in themselves because obviously when they used to go to America, they fought more like as opponents and didn't really produce. But now that, like Manny Pacquiao did to the Philippines, I feel that George Kambosos has done to Australia. And I know Leon Parro is going to take a lot from that. And you'll see a real spirited performance from Parro on the undercard.
And let's get into this undercard because there's a lot of intriguing matchups. You got Amanda Serrano against Miriam Gutierrez. You have an former NBA All-Star against a former NFL Pro Bowl running back, a crossover we never thought we'd see. NFL star versus NBA star, and Darren Williams versus Frank Gore. Heavyweight bout, 4 rounds. We just mentioned Leanne Parro. You got the return of Anthony Taylor fighting Chris Avila, a member of Team Diaz, of Nate Diaz in mixed martial arts in the UFC, which can potentially set up a future fight between Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, a boxing fight. Jay Leon loves making his return. I mean, gentlemen, Dan, which fight are you looking forward to the most here on the undercard?
I think the one that is the most meaningful is probably the co-feature, which is Amanda Serrano, who's probably pound for pound, in the top 2 or 3 female boxers in the world. And she's taken on, as you mentioned, she's taken on Miriam Gutierrez. Now, it's not a title fight. Serrano has a belt in the featherweight division. She's fighting this fight as a lightweight, but it's an important fight because of what comes in the future. She needs to win this fight against Gutierrez, probably look pretty good against her, make sure she gets to win first and foremost. But what they're trying to do, of course, is set up the women's mega fight in boxing, which is Amanda Serrano challenging the undisputed women's lightweight champion, Katie Taylor from Ireland. Katie Taylor just won her tune-up fight or title defense, call it a tune-up, call it a defense, whatever you want to call it. But she won her fight last weekend on the undercard of the Conor Benn Chris Algieri fight. Now it's up to Amanda Serrano to fight her way into that fight. And if she wins, the promoters are talking that they're going to fight each other for that undisputed women's lightweight championship, probably at Madison Square Garden sometime, in the first half of next year. And in women's boxing, that is as big of a fight as you can possibly make in the sport. So my eyes are going to be paid attention to how Amanda Serrano comes through against a very solid opponent in the Gutierrez on that undercard in the co-feature.
The Schmo's follow-up question to that, Dan, is do you believe that Amanda needs to win in a certain way, a certain type of statement, in order to ensure that her next fight will be against Katie Taylor for that undisputed?
I think the main thing is she needs to win. Obviously, if you want to make people even more interested in that pairing, you want to win in good style and take care of business. That doesn't necessarily mean a knockout. It just means put on a good display of boxing, show what you can do, go in there and dominate, hopefully make it entertaining for the viewers and the folks that are in the arena. And, we already know what she's capable of. She's won world titles, more divisions than any other women's boxer in history. She's been, a tremendous fighter. She's gone up and down in weights all the way, I think, as far down as the bantamweight division, maybe the junior bantamweight division, has fought us heavy. She's fighting this fight as a lightweight. So, Amanda Serrano has run through, any number of quality female opponents over the years that she's been a pro. But this, of course, if she can get the Katie Taylor fight, would be by far her biggest fight. And likewise, even though Katie Taylor has become the undisputed champion in her weight class, and she's also briefly went up one fight to win a title in the junior welterweight division, I believe that Katie Taylor will look at Amanda Serrano as by far and away her most notable opponent, her biggest challenge, her toughest foe. It's a real super fight in women's boxing. There aren't a lot of them, but this is the kind of fight that could headline, any type of show that there is in boxing. And so it's very important that she wins. But again, does she have to win in a specific style? She doesn't have to do that. She just has to make sure she wins the fight. That's first and foremost. Look good, and that will even make the drumbeat for their pairing next year, much, much bigger. But, I've said on our Fight Focus shows, we've talked about Amanda on previous undercards. I'm not the biggest women's boxing fan, but I have massive respect for the types of accomplishments that Amanda has done, that Katie has done. And if there's one women's fight that's going to get me excited, it's that fight. So I'm very interested to see how Amanda performs against Gutierrez on this undercard.
And a few weeks ago, to your point, during the Jojo Diaz-Devin Haney fight week, the Schmo asked Eddie Hearn what fight is he looking forward to booking the most in 2022. He mentioned Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano's. It's on his radar. let's move on to Jack. What is the biggest storyline of the undercard, the biggest matchup that you're looking forward to seeing the most here?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Dan. It's Serrano Gutierrez, because there's so much that follows on from that. As we mentioned, it potentially sets up one of the biggest fights in women's boxing. I believe Taylor actually beat Gutierrez as well. So to your earlier point about does Amanda have to win in a certain way? Not really, but if she can better Taylor's performance, it only helps to build their fight more. But I feel like that's the only real fight on the card that has any sort of real bearing on future boxing matches. If you look at the rest of the card, a lot of them are fun fights, but they could be sort of one and done. So for sure, Serrano is the pick of the undercard.
All right, let's extend that question over to you, Peter.
Look, I'm looking forward to Liam Parrow because he's undefeated, 21 and zip, up against Yoma Alamo, who's also 20 and zip. So they're both undefeated fighters. They're both world rated. They're both highly rated on BoxRec as well. So for mine, that's a real fight. Two undefeated fighters. They've got no profile. They're probably not getting the money that the other fighters are getting. They're doing it tough. They're doing it through the ranks. One of these guys will probably get a top 5 world ranking from this, and then go on and maybe fight an eliminator or fight for a world title. But right at the moment, us sort of fans sitting there, we're not thinking of it as an imperative bout that's going to be anything of significance. But the winner of this fight, make no mistake, will set himself up for a bigger and better fight. So for mine, Parrow and Alamo, because they're both undefeated and it's a 50-50 fight. I think it's going to go down to the wire, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, speaking of 50-50 fight, the Schmo's going to take the bait and talk about the NFL Pro Bowler against the NBA All-Star, because you're bringing in two major popular sports, not just in the United States, but worldwide, right here to the eyeballs. And look, Frank Gore, he's a scary dude. We're going to see if he has hands. The Schmo bumped into him in Cleveland. He watched the Jake Paul Tyron Woodley fight first. And let's just say this. Darren Williams has been training mixed martial arts and striking for years. He's a co-owner of Fortis MMA with Save Sahood back in Texas, in Dallas, Texas. These guys aren't just going for a show. The Schmo predicts we'll see these guys in the ring again, but it can only be good for the sport, adding more eyeballs and popularity. And it might be a little freak showish, but at least you're getting stud athletes from two different sports competing against each other. It's a level playing field.
It is, Smo. I just asked one question. It's okay hitting a pad, Smo. It's okay shadow boxing. What are they like when the bullets start coming back? What's their technique and form like? That's when you find out.
And that's why this is a 4-round fight as opposed to an 8-round or 12-round fight. We're going to see what their gas tanks are like, and we're going to see how they perform under the bright lights of the squared circle. That's a very, very good point. Gentlemen, can we get a prediction out of you guys for the Jake Paul Tyron Woodley fight? We can't let you walk out of here without a prediction. And Peter, let's start with you.
I think Jake Paul's younger, he's bigger, he's stronger, he's fitter, and it means more to him at this stage of his career. Tyron Woodley taking it on short notice, maybe for the payday more. So, look, I think Jake Paul's going to have some rocky moments. Woodley will be a live opponent. I'm tipping Jake Paul in a split decision again.
Okay. Dan, what's your prediction?
Well, based on the first fight, based on the fact that Woodley is taking the fight on a little bit of a short notice, I don't know how much more he can fight better than he did against Jake in the first fight in terms of as a boxer. I believe that Jake can improve and fight better than he did in the first fight. And now that he's got 8 rounds to go on, I think that he wins the rematch by another 8-round decision, but even more convincing than he won the first fight.
And Jack, let's get your prediction here.
Yeah, I mean, I really think Woodley struggled with the range last time. I mean, I spoke to Paul's trainer, BJ Flores, and he said, it was really easy to see that Tyron really did struggle with finding his punching range, because in MMA it's completely different, and I'm not sure whether Tyron Woodley can bridge that gap in such a short period of time, unless Jake Paul takes needless risks. If he's actually the one to shorten the distance. And I feel like Jake has a smart enough team in BJ Flores and the rest of the guys to tell him to stick to the game plan that they had last time, box at range behind your jab, because Woodley really did struggle. So I actually see again, another points win for Jake Paul, but I don't know whether maybe this time an ego thing that Jake has gone the distance and that he felt that he took Woodley's best shot. Maybe he might want to take more chances and look for the finish. But if he's smart enough and his team is smart enough, they'll probably tell him to stick to the boxing move tactics here over the 8 rounds, and I think he'll win.
And there's a $500,000 bonus in Tyron Woodley's contract if he knocks out Jake Paul. Maybe a little extra motivation to do some headhunting. So, gentlemen, it seems like there's a clean sweep of everybody picking Jake Paul in this fight. So then the Schmo's got to follow up and ask you all, what would be next for Jake Paul that you would like to see for him advancing and getting that credibility as a professional boxer? Would you like to see him go back to a Tommy Fury? Would you like to see him go to a different boxer? Is there a different name in mind? Is there a different MMA crossover name you have in mind? Anybody that comes off the top of your mind, we will start with you, Jack.
Well, I understand the calls for Jake Paul to fight a boxer, but you've got to remember this is a guy that is very inexperienced and he is a pay-per-view fighter, so he can't just pluck any 5-0 boxer to match up with and expect it to do well on pay-per-view. So I feel like if he's not fighting Tommy Fury, he has to go back down the UFC route, a former champion of the UFC, and I just don't know if people will buy into that the same way. So for me, I think the Tommy Fury fight's perfect. They match up fairly well, and I think the fact that Tommy pulled out of the first fight makes it only so much more interesting the second time around, because there is questions of, fans are questioning the validity of whether it was a real injury or not. So I think there's even more to play with this time around, and I just feel like Jake and his team will probably look at Tommy and think he is the best matched opponent for the big stage that we can go with. If they do need a professional boxer to face, and I feel like no one's at a similar level to Jake Paul that can bring in the numbers that Tommy can. So yeah, for me, I'd like to see that fight rescheduled.
The irony of the rib injury is that Tyron Woodley's last professional fight in the UFC, it ended due to a stoppage, due to them calling it because Tyron Woodley had a rib injury. Here he is stepping in to fight someone because they had a rib injury and had to pull out the boxing match. Let me extend this question to you, Peter. Who would you like to see Jake Paul fight next to add legitimacy to his career if he gets past Tyron Woodley a second time?
Yeah, look, Fury could be a possibility, but it depends on the budget. I'd love to see him fight someone like a Roy Jones Jr., get him out of retirement, get the hype up. Roy Jones looked pretty good against Mike Tyson, 190 pounds, whatever catch weight they do. I think that would get a bit of interest, because I think that would then get him into that, legitimate box, even though Roy Jones is over 50 years of age, just for that popularity. I'm sure the pay-per-views would go crazy, and I don't think he's got anything in his armour that can hurt Roy Jones Jr. He's just, had an exhibition with Mike Tyson. But that would be the fight that I would like to see if they couldn't get the Fury fight.
Dan, bring us, because we just went from Roy Jones Jr., Tommy Fury, Roy Jones Jr. Where do you stand with the future opponent for Jake Paul?
Well, all due respect to Peter, I don't need or want to see Roy Jones in a boxing ring unless it's as a trainer in the corner. And even at age 50, Roy Jones has forgotten more boxing than Jake Paul has ever known and will ever know. And even at this stage of the game, I would not think it would be a good night for Jake Paul. Let's stick to the fact that he is a novice boxer, and I'd like to see him fight another boxer. I agree with Jack. They might as well reschedule the Tommy Fury fight. It had gotten a lot of hype before Tommy's withdrawal. If Jake wins the fight against Woodley, why not make the rematch? I think it will. It'll create a lot of interest, because they'll be back and forth about, you pulled out against me, and, we'll call him a chicken and all that sort of stuff. Face me now. I think there'll be hype there. And the main thing is, if Jake is serious about his boxing career and improving his abilities and his skills, at some point you need to fight a guy, full-time boxer, which Tommy has been. He has not participated in other sports. So even though he's 7-0, he did fight on Jake's undercard the last time around. The whole point was to try to match them up. I think it makes the most sense to go back to that, make that rematch, and let's leave Roy Jones in retirement, please.
Well, we all know that the Fury family and the Paul family have been feuding. John Fury, he has some words. Tyson Fury's come on this. Tommy Fury's been there. The intrigue is still there. Josh, let's bring you all back in here. Let's close this up. Let's tell our viewers and our listeners where you can tune in December 18th to watch these fights.
Thank you, Schmo, and thank you to our panelists for being here. When was the last time that we had a rematch of this magnitude taking place just 4 months after the original match? I am so pumped for this. I am excited for this fight, and I know you are as well. The event comes to you Saturday, December 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, live on FITE outside the U.S. and outside Latin America. If you're in the U.S., you're going to want to go to Showtime. Don't forget that. Showtime is where you're going to want to be. But everywhere else outside the U.S. and Latin America, it's right here on FITE, baby. So make sure that you join us live. I'm Josh Shernoff for the Schmo and the rest of the panel. We will see you right here on FITE Saturday, December 18th for Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley